am going to just bring in, go straight in and bring in the next panel. So the next panel that we will be having is talking about what is the role of digital currency within the global political economy. Once again, we have Sia Sangweni, who is a brand manager of Cliff Central, coming on board as one of our phenomenal hosts in this panel. So I'm going to just hand over to him to begin to just introduce our speakers, as we also incorporate our other speakers.
So thank you very much for staying with us again. And just as we get things started, a very good afternoon once again to all of you, wherever you're watching from. Thank you so much for taking the time to stick with us, and I hope you are enjoying these conversations. Whatever you have to add, any questions or comments, and however you want to connect, let us know in the chat section of this Zoom call, and we'll be able to incorporate that in the next conversation that we're going to have. But right now, I'm keen to let our panel introduce themselves, and I also want to pose this question to them actually as we get started. What is most exciting to you right now about the way digital currency is changing things in the world around us? So firstly, let me start off with you, Cornelius. Please introduce yourself and what's exciting to you right now.
Hi everyone, hi viewers, hi Sia, Michelle, and fellow panelists. It's an honor for me to be joining you from South Korea. I'm Kalenz Cornelius, originally from Uganda. I live and work in South Korea, and I'm also a fellow at World Economic Forum. It's very exciting, not just with the cryptocurrencies and digital finance and fintech. What's happening is, I think what COVID-19 has really done, if I can just briefly say, is to shift gears in the digital transformation. So we see rapid transformations going on across every sectors. And I've never been excited in my life like now, because I see amazing opportunities to do a lot of things, to leapfrog our economies, to transform sectors, not just in banking sectors, but education, healthcare. Wherever you look, you see opportunities to change. So it's very exciting opportunities, and I just look forward to sharing all about this. Yeah.
Awesome. Moving on to our next panelist, Chris, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us what you're excited about in this time of rapid change?
Well, I'm Chris Southwood. I'm Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce here in the UK, but in the context of this conversation, I'm the founder of the ICC Digital Trade Roadmap. You know, I completely copy Cornelius's comments there. This is the most exciting time in terms of digitization we've ever seen. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to really put the building blocks in place for the future economy. And I think that's the opportunity. That's what we're all excited about. The question for me is can we move fast enough? And I think in the context of finance, you know, we've got some huge challenges, you know, to get liquidity into the market. The trade finance gap has doubled in the COVID period to 3 to 5 trillion. And most importantly, we're talking about short-term working capital for SMEs. Small companies need access to finance in quick and fast forms. And I think digital currencies are all part of that mix. But it's a question, can we get the right regulatory frameworks in place? Can we modernize our laws fast enough? Can we get the standards into place quickly enough? And then how do we get out onto the ground and help companies understand how they can actually participate?
Great. Sonia, please introduce yourself to our audience and let us know what is to you very exciting about being in this disruptive time right now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on the panel today. I am Sonia Davidovich. I'm an economist and digital expert at the International Monetary Fund. And I'm very excited about the potential that financial technology holds for financial inclusion. It's very near and dear to my heart. And most recently, we've been exploring at the fund as part of a working group how central bank digital currency can fulfill that promise and help enhance financial inclusion efforts. And in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've also been exploring how CBDC can serve as a payment rail to distribute fiscal stimulus to those that are most in need. I think this is particularly interest for the sub-Saharan African context. So I'm definitely going to touch upon that in our conversation later.
Perfect. And then Dr. Roslyn, please introduce yourself to our audience and let us know what is exciting to you right now.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Roslyn Ngeno with the Africa Union Commission at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Support Unit. I'm very happy to be here today. What is exciting is, for Africa particularly, is the new voice in town, which is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area now in force, though we have been delayed by COVID, but then COVID has now shown us that we need to move into the digital transformation. We urgently need to accelerate Africa's digital transformation. We need to shape a more consolidated and innovative business sector. We need to reshape manufacturing. We'll both focus on self-reliance, and we need to create avenues for easy and affordable access to credit and facilitation of cross-border payments. And therefore, what therefore happens now is the need then to have adoption and implementation of harmonized and e-commerce legislations, which includes transaction laws, data protection privacy laws, cybersecurity laws, e-commerce and consumer protection laws. And this has to be done at the apex of the policy organs. And I believe Africa Union Commission is now presenting this, and it is really exciting for us. It is providing this platform to bring this harmonization and stability. Thank you very much.
Definitely want to touch on policy a little late in the conversation, because I think that's a very important aspect of the conversation and moving forward. Michelle, there's no need for me to reintroduce you to the audience, but for you, what is exciting to you about this time? I know it's definitely and clearly exciting to you, because this is why we formulated this panel.
Yes, absolutely. So I've been wanting to kind of do a little dance since I started doing the event today. And I think for me, I am so excited. Yes, we have the horrible experience of COVID, but I think, because of COVID, in a way, we have, as Dr. Roslyn just pointed out, we have a little bit more focus around the opportunities with digital transformation, the opportunities with e-commerce, and then we've got the gold as well that we have around the CFTA. So you can imagine, for me, in my world, I feel like I'm a child who's had lots of candy and just can't control myself. So I'm very, very excited. I think the world is going to transform. Yes, we've had a bad time. And everybody's been affected by COVID, but you know what? There's so many enabling solutions in place. And the other really exciting thing, I think, is also we've got such talent on the continent. And if we invest in building capacity and we invest in the talent, then I really believe that we're going to be, really shifting the dial a little bit. So I agree with absolutely everybody. Chris is right on the digital trade and opening up and promoting that paperless trade. I think is very, very important. And in my world of blockchain and digital transformation, creating trust. I think we need to create trust. We need to have those global value chains that are actually, spilling out trust. And that will, with trust, you bring the whole, cross-border engagement and trade across different countries, and would actually ease things up so that, tapping on the trust machine, as I call it, which is things like blockchain, and not in isolation, as I said earlier on, is actually looking at the converged technologies and then applying that with the human capacity is pretty important. And I think that's what's kind of getting me very, very excited, because I can see such massive potential for it.
Fantastic. Cornelius, let me start off with you. I think it's very easy right now for us to talk in hindsight, and that's a good position to be in as we're preparing the future. But let's go back like 7-8 months when COVID came along, and we had the structures that we had, and we were used to them. The fact that so many of the panelists as well are talking about, reshaping and looking at structures again. How did you feel? And on the perspective of the World Economic Forum back then, and looking at how things had to change in the global scene?
Well, 2019 feels like I call it 2019 BC, before COVID.
That is very apt, yes.
It seems so far away because the transformation we've had in the past 7 months, it's something that from the IT perspective, from the implementation perspective, it's something that usually takes decades. When you look at the banking sector, when you look at the whatever, I had 5 conferences to travel, but all of them got cancelled, and I'm so excited I didn't have to travel. Now we're here, and every sector we look at, basically, there's so much transformation. I work for a university. To transform a university, to switch online, it would take probably a decade, and it took 1 month. 1 month. So I think to keep my answers very brief, 3 things are happening. First, COVID has double-charged the digital transformation, and we're going to see a lot of that's happening. What that means is that those that are ready are moving ahead. Countries like Singapore that have been implementing blockchain in supply chain, countries that are ahead in fintech. The economies are functioning, and countries that are not ready, we are seeing them struggling so much. So that's a very, very fundamental shift. And what that means for Africa, us in Africa, is, as Dr. Rosalind earlier mentioned, we need to think about how we can catch up.
Chris, would you agree with that? There's a catch-up tactic that needs to happen, because from your perspective with the ICC, what have the past couple of months done in any sort of progress and in implementation that we could have been doing?
Well, I think there's a couple of points, one that Michelle's made and one that Cornelius has made here. I mean, I think COVID has acted as put rocket boosters onto the digital agenda. We should have been doing this anyway, but now it's absolutely a solution, as well as it is obviously the future. So there's a combination there. We've got to a crossroads where we can actually do this stuff. I think a really important point here is that we're not necessarily tearing up the system. What we're saying is there is a lot of expertise out there. We do know what policy frameworks work. We know what laws need to change. We know how the technologies are in the market. International cooperation is absolutely key to this, and getting the right infrastructure into place to build public trust in general, actually. But trust is really fundamental. It's a solution to deliver trust, as well as it is the Sustainable Development Goals and everything else. But, you know, we do have the ingredients. This is all about cooperation at regional level, international level, and national level. And if we do that, there's every chance that we can accelerate the agenda from what would have been 10, 20 years. Don't forget, we've had no change in rules for 20 years. We could do this in a year. We know that much detail and that much kind of expertise around us. So, you know, and I have to say, I should have said before, Africa for me is the place to do it. For one simple reason is that nowhere else in the world really can you build this into the AFCFTA framework from the beginning. You know, in most other places, it's all about re-engineering into legacy systems. That's super complicated. Africa has a wonderful opportunity to kind of put all of this infrastructure in place from the start, and then actually leapfrog pretty much everybody as a region. That's the exciting potential, and there's so much dynamism and energy coming from Africa with such a large youth population. It's got all the ingredients for success.
Right. Dr. Rosalind, Chris touches on the idea of priorities shifting and changing over the past little while and where we are right now. Do you sense the same thing when it comes to the power and the impact of digital currency right now? And if so, actually, what are those changes and impacts that you're sensing?
The changes and impacts, they are immense. As Cornelia has actually indicated, we've leapfrogged from May up to now. Whatever we have done in terms of quick policy and legal changes in our respective countries to adopt the fintech move has been enormous. We have, for example, Kenya. Kenya, during when they were trying to contain COVID, all payments were actually made paperless. So you had to use the M-Pesa to make any payment. The bank allow a certain threshold for withdrawals of funds or deposits of the same. Taxes were zero rated on some of these important technologies that needed to facilitate trade at that particular time. The other aspect that actually changed very much was the quick transformation within our industrial space. Yes, there is a fintech, and then there is a technology that came with it that needed to transform to meet the needs that came with the broken value chain that resulted from COVID. So there's a lot that has been done. I have a few examples that I wish to, let me just read through some of the examples that we can see what has happened in the continent in terms of the advancement. Although the continent is still lagging behind in the use of this technology of the fourth industrial revolution. So UNECA's data, for instance, gives an encouraging example. Senegal is using Daral Technologies. Daral Technologies is using digital technology to ensure the identification and security of we have a tech center, which is using digital solutions to disseminate business information to farmers. We have TechnoServe's use of satellite imaging, which is helping improve production in the farms, etc., etc. But then in terms of cross-border trade, the digital solutions have helped. There is quick payments across the board. The still has limited access to this, but it has immensely helped, particularly the SMEs who are very vulnerable. Cross-border payments has been useful. Thank you. Stand by for other questions.
Sonia, I'm sensing there is a bit of a, CBDC coming in to be a great equalizer and leveler when it comes to the global political economy and the role that digital currency plays in it. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I want to say that global stablecoins have definitely been like a proverbial kick in the butt to the public sector to wake up and take a look at digital currencies in a more meaningful way, because ultimately these global stablecoins threaten the monetary sovereignty of central banks, of monetary authorities. They also complicate the conduct of monetary policy. So I think that central banks across the world have realized that they have to step up and do something about these developments. This is not to say that there's a competition that is a zero-win type of situation. I do believe that the public and private sector can really have a mutually beneficial collaboration in this ecosystem. The way I see central bank digital currency unfolding is not just those two currencies competing, as I just said, but I see more of an opportunity for the public sector to provide an infrastructure, to provide an enabling ecosystem with adequate regulation and policies in place that will allow digital financial service providers to offer their products and services on top of that infrastructure. So basically building out a technology stack that others, the private sector, can build upon. Because if there's one thing that I agree with Chris fully in, that the biggest potential that I see in sub-Saharan Africa is the youth, is the capacity that these young people can bring to the table. And there's a real opportunity for central banks to create that ecosystem, to provide the infrastructure for young entrepreneurs to build on top. I've seen it firsthand last year at the Africa Blockchain Summit. I was really impressed. There was like a competition of young entrepreneurs who created their own blockchain applications. It was really impressive to see that. So I do think that there's an opportunity for central banks to step in and be this equalizing factor that will both advance central bank digital currency as a public good, but also foster innovation and an enabling environment for private sector applications to thrive.
So definitely, I think we can all somewhat agree that what digital currencies have been able to do right now is really entrench a lot of innovation and change in our world, regardless of where you are. But Cornelius, on the point of trust, as has been mentioned before, is a very important aspect in all of this. Do you think the track record of people having to be forced into innovation over the past couple of months is enough to entrench what digital currencies can do and should be doing for people in the future?
Should I say forced? I don't know if I would use the word forced. Yeah, in a sense, COVID has given us I'll use Sonia's word, a kick in the butt. It has forced us to do things that we knew we could do, but just didn't have the guts to try. This is my prediction, and I could be totally wrong because predictions for the future are always wrong. It's not the issue of trust. It's the issue of finally we see the things work. We are seeing firsthand. Dr. Rosalind mentioned how fintech is functioning in the COVID era in Kenya. I was talking to friends in Kigali, from Kigali fintech space, and the government has literally come up with the regulation to say, okay, we've been playing games, let's do this. So in Kigali, it's gone cashless. The whole country has gone cashless. So is it the issue of trust? I think we know it works. Now we need to start moving in the directions of how we now start scaling these innovations up across different countries and the continent. Yeah.
So then how do we get about doing that? Chris, I think we have to look at you and look at policies in making that change.
Yeah, I think there's two things here, actually. I would say trust is definitely one major issue. I think the other one is a risk that was just flagged earlier on, the digital divide. I think there's a real risk at the moment that we have a breakaway within a twin track world where those who have the capabilities and policies in place move forward and everybody else gets left behind. So I think the answer to the question is we need an even approach that works for everybody, all working together on a common goal. Like I said, we know what needs to be done. The frameworks are there to draw down from, but we just need to do it in the African context. That's the beauty, again, of the AFCFTA framework, I think, is you have this terrific political will to move on an even basis, allowing those who are the front movers to go at the pace they want, but making sure that we're all moving together. Otherwise, there will be this kind of twin track world. And that's not just an African problem, of course, that's a global problem that we are really alert to avoid it. And importantly, put the pressure on donors to put the right level of investment into digital infrastructure, connectivity. There's still too many people who are not connected to the internet. We're almost 50 years off track from the SDG 2030 goal in the LDC, less developed countries. Some of those, of course, are in Africa. So we need, real investment into core infrastructure, get the right policy fundamentals into place, data protection policies, consumer protection, the things that sort of give people the confidence that this is working, and then all move forward together so that we get a level playing field for everybody.
Sure.
Yeah, if I could just back up Chris's point a little bit more. I see two things. The first one is we need what I would prefer to call a digital New Deal. And the metaphor for the New Deal is, if you read a little bit about history, in the US, when they were going through a crisis, they came up with a New Deal to reset the economy. I think what we need right now is to see a digital New Deal that is coming in terms of massive funding as Chris mentioned, around infrastructure and narrowing the digital divide. But within the global community, they've been supporting different ICT projects, digital infrastructure projects across the continent. I think we need a digital master plan. I call it a digital master plan. If you've read a bit about history.
You're getting a ton of new terms here, Cornelius. One at a time.
Yeah. So basically being able to massively invest in this to see that Africa catches up. The reason for this is because if you look at the numbers, if you look at the statistics, we're talking about blockchain now, we're talking about CBDC right now. But if you look at the numbers, only a few countries, about 40% of the continent has 4G network. How can we talk about transformation when you have only 40% on 4G network? About 80% has a 3G network. It's covered by the 3G network. So the infrastructure requirements that are needed to bring the transformation we need in the digital space, in the central bank digital currencies, in digitalization across different sectors is just enormous. And without massive funding within the continent, but also from outside, I think just playing a bit of games, if I could just be blunt.
Yeah.
Michelle, Sonia, and Dr. Roslyn, I see a lot of nodding from each of you. I want to take your quickly.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think we can all agree that more infrastructure investment is a good thing and it's definitely needed. But I also want to implore everyone to start thinking about what is in the realm of possible right now. Because, I mean, those are massive investments that require a lot of capital and that require planning and that require donor coordination and so on. And those are long-term, medium to long-term sort of projects. So what I think is important to focus on, like, what is that is possible within within the realm that exists now that can make a tiny bit of a difference, but every step of the way leads to some sort of progress. And I think that, like, we have to start thinking about, like, for example, the example of Togo is a great one in terms of, like, being able to quickly distribute fiscal stimulus in a time of crisis. I think it's an excellent example of what a country that doesn't necessarily have the perfect infrastructure in place can do with the possibilities, with the opportunities it has at hand. So encourage everyone to think a little bit outside of the box and realize the potential that exists right now. Is it something that can be done on, like, on an e-government, from an e-government perspective? What about collecting any data that is available? What about utilizing feature phones that a lot of the vast majority of the population in sub-Saharan Africa has access to? So what are the solutions that we can implement right now before we have that perfect infrastructure in place? And I think this kind of thinking really leads to, like, small incremental changes that ultimately lead to this, when we call it digital transformation. I don't see it as something that just, like, hits like a comet and then it changes everything. It's something that happens in small and incremental ways, and everyone has a part to play in that. So I really encourage everyone to think about, what can I do? What is the must-have or the best that I can do with what I have right now?
Michelle, I saw again a lot of nothing from you.
I think you've been saying that. I've been dying to come in, but no, I think just, following on from what Sonia has just said, yes, we might be kind of further down the line in terms of bringing in full-on, infrastructure redeployment across the continent, but I think we need to start thinking slightly different in the sense that what is it that's possible now, but also what is possible in the next 20, 30 years. That strategic planning, strategic thinking, I think that has to come in quite strongly. And when we're talking about central bank digital currencies, even though, yes, we might be saying for most countries, even those that have got pilots in place, are still a little bit long way down the line before they're implementing a full-blown central bank digital currency. It takes a lot of time. It does take a lot of resources. I think we have to be very mindful that when we are talking about these things and proposing these things, be very, very cautious about how we're proposing. Even when we're talking about designing of central bank digital currencies, we have to bear in mind the country structures, right? And the stages of development or access to resources in order to implement, such innovations. But it doesn't stop us from thinking outside the box. It doesn't stop us from saying, you know what, in 20, 30 years time, we need to be able to implement CBDC if that is, fit for the market that we're talking about. And in order to do that, how are we going to do it? Are we equipping, are we building capacity? I think that is something that should be looked at right now. Even the United Nations, I mean, I was doing a training program with them on blockchain just about 2 weeks ago. And we said on that program, 200 attendees, government attendees on that program. And most of the attendees were saying, actually, the really important thing is to start thinking about building capacity. We're going to have automation coming. We have automation where people's jobs are going to flip and change. Even the way we work, the future of work is going to be very, very different. So how are we thinking and equipping the world, to think a little bit different? So very, very much echo that. And then the other thing around things like central bank digital currencies, yes, in places like Kenya, we've had massive, kind of adoption around digital currency, but the picture is not the same across Africa. Yes, a lot of African countries, Rwanda and Ghana, are playing around with blockchain. And even they've used drones, for example, for those stimulus packages that Sonia alluded to, where, during COVID, they've used these technologies to actually deploy food, water and all that. But how are we thinking about scaling? How are we going to scale those solutions? How are we going to ensure that the local talent and the local governments are equipped in order to actually leverage those technologies? And I think by bringing in this CBDC discussion here, the main aim was really to say, okay, what is it that we need to think about? In a technical terms, which we're not discussing here, but even in a technical design term, which Sonia will know what I'm saying, even in terms of how you design the CBDC will matter. How that CBDC is implemented will matter. Because if you have a CBDC in place, which cannot get people, you cannot get adoption from it, then that CBDC is going to fail. You would have invested quite a lot of money in an environment where people don't warm up to a digital currency, for example.
Right.
Either because you've got an aging population or something they're more used to having their cash, even if you've got COVID. So all those things really need to be considered, I think, as we talk about CBDC. And then the more wider structural issues as well have to be considered. So very much agree with everybody on the panel. And it's a fantastic panel because we're getting a lot out of the different areas.
Yeah, so I just want to go to some audience questions that people have been sending, and please continue to do so as well, just on the Q&A and the chat option here on Zoom. This is a question from Pumza, directed to you, Dr. Rosalind. Pumza says, the 5% agenda that the first speaker spoke about at AU level, should it not prioritize digital infrastructure investment? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that question. I saw that because in the heads, that was in February 2020, they actually prioritized digital negotiations at the continental level. So now we have, first of all, just a quick background. We have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area negotiations, which we are now finalizing phase 1 of trade in goods, trade in services, rules of origin. Now with that, we are going into phase 2, where we are negotiating the investment protocol to enhance the competitiveness. We are negotiating the competition policy and the intellectual property policy. So within the intellectual property, it ties into what we have discussed here. We are, it is supposed to support innovation of such, technologies. But then now, they realized that there was a very urgent need on digital technologies, fintech, etc., to negotiate, therefore, what we call phase 3, e-commerce and digital technology or digital platform, to provide that framework, the enabling framework, therefore undertake and accelerate the use of the same. Within that context of the digital, within the context of the digital framework, What the Africa policymakers can then use to provide this framework is to define the regulations, the legal frameworks, and the enforcement mechanisms for issues such as technology standards, consumer protection, and digital regulations to support cross-border e-commerce. Digital technology, therefore, will spur cross-border trade by enhancing the protection, automation, and reduce costs. We'll have, if time will allow, there are certain issues that we are envisaging in this phase 3, which will need to be negotiated, including data governance rules and regulations, electronic transactions, e-commerce, facilitation of e-commerce, goods trades, and general principles and coordination. But without now the infrastructure to enable this to take place, is nothing that we're doing. So again, at that particular level, they are being advised, there is a lot of support, particularly from the African institutions, to support the development of the infrastructure itself, because fintech without the utilization, without the structure, without the infrastructure, we cannot see the economic potential for it, or the economic support, or the economic growth for the same. So thank you.
Dr. Roslyn. On the issue of time, we have about 5 minutes left, but I want to make sure that we cover a lot of bases. So I'll just go straight to some questions and I'll open it up to the panel. Whomever feels fit to answer, please do. Someone would like to know, they say the panel is amazing and we're enjoying the insights. I hear all the positives about CBDC and cryptocurrencies, but I need a balanced view of what is the worst that can happen, though.
I'm happy to take that, and I have to apologize if the impression was given that CBDC is all positive and all rosy and that it will always work great. I mean, maybe in the hype of the conversation it came across as that, but I want to just give a few points on how complex of an undertaking a central bank digital currency is. It is not something that is within the traditional mandate of a central bank. It is something that needs to be designed with great care, with public consultation, with a lot of data that is collected in an iterative process so that most of the risk can be mitigated. The risks are enormous. A poorly designed CBDC can cause huge financial stability issues. It can disrupt the banking system. It can bring about financial integrity issues. It can create massive liquidity and credit risk in the financial system. And most importantly, the cyber risk that any digital currency faces is something that is paramount to address from the very beginning, from the design, from the outset of designing a CBDC. The cyber risks are extremely important because they expose the whole ecosystem, the whole system to massive vulnerabilities. And for a central bank, the reputational risk is something that they can't mitigate away. If something happens and there's a glitch in the system or an operational disruption or a hack, the central bank is a public institution that has to respond to the public and to the legislators in the country. So there's very little room for error, unlike for private sector companies have the luxury to fail and try again. A central bank does not have that same luxury. So reputational risk is really at the center of these problems. For cryptocurrencies, the risks are slightly different. I mean, we're talking about huge volatility, potential for violation of consumer protection if the funds are not protected or backed adequately. As I mentioned earlier, for the cases of global stablecoins, it can disrupt monetary policy conduct and so on. I think the list of risks there are even longer in that case, but in the chat I shared additional resources on CBDC that you can read up about, because I'm not going to be able in a few minutes. I want to give the other an opportunity to speak. I'm not going to be able to list out all the risks, but I encourage you to read through the paper and please get in touch if you have more questions.
Sorry, I was muted. One last audience question before then I go to the panel for final comments. It comes from Elijah, and he's asking, are there any policy union or group standardizing and managing the usability of the different digital currencies within the framework of AFTA? Anyone who would like to answer that?
I can jump on that, Sia. So I don't think there is a policy group necessarily, but I know that a lot of the central banks have been, meeting to discuss the topic and to look at, avenues of collaborating around how we look at things like central bank digital currencies. The other really important thing I think to highlight is also with central bank digital currencies, it's still a very long journey. I think to just make it crystal clear, it's still a very long journey. As I said earlier on, the design, implications of a CBDC could either be very detrimental or, very, very effective. That work has to be put in order to actually establish properly whether you do actually in the first place need a central bank digital currency or not. What are the implications for your financial markets in your country, including your commercial banks? For example, and how would that impact them? We have two different types of CBDC. We have the retail side, and you've got the wholesale side, where of course the banks and how those banks interact with one another. Again, you have to debate and think about that. Of course, massive opportunities around CBDC and opportunity for cross-border and remittance type activity between interbank activity, if you like. But I think you really have to, dig deep and try to understand the space. In my view, I think any central bank digital currency that is implemented has to be easy. It has to be robust and secure, which we've talked about today. It has to have that inclusivity factor. So where you're not cutting out half of the population in your country, and you've got one set who is adopting, that would not necessarily work for the system. Of course, it has massive opportunities around, helping with stabilizing monetary policy in some areas. But again, that you have to take that with caveats and depending what you're talking about, which country you're talking about. So lots of stuff, unanswered questions, I think, with central bank digital currencies. And the picture that's been given to us by Mr. Hubert earlier on around what's happening in different parts of the world on CBDC. A lot of piloting is going on. Probably one of the most advanced is China, and some of the stuff they're doing around that. But even the way the Chinese central bank digital currency is designed isn't necessarily utilizing DLT or blockchain, for example. So there are different ways of designing it. Bank of England, again, we've given some ideas and responses to that. Again, they're looking at it slightly different. And we are producing a report, as I said earlier on, for everybody after this event, where we're really trying to shed a lot more light, as to should you be looking at CBDC? If you are, what are the implications for you, especially in Africa? So the focus for us is in Africa. What does it mean? How can we work with central banks? Who are the players that need to come together? And very much the conversation from today.
Awesome. And then just final comment from the whole panel, just in wrapping up. Last words from you, Cornelius.
Yeah, I was just enjoying listening to Michelle and to Sonia, and one quick point that came to my mind is I think the biggest failure or the biggest risk that we see is failure to try. Give these ideas, including CBDC, a chance. So what they're doing in Korea, for example, in South Korea right now, is they've announced that they're going to experiment with a CBDC for the next 2 years. Pilot it, check the risks, the opportunities, and see what's going to happen. They're opening up sandbox regulations for people to experiment with these ideas and see that they work. So I was looking at the statistics and I was seeing that only a handful of those we're not giving this the biggest risk or the biggest thing that is going to happen to us is if we don't open our innovation systems to these ideas. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Cornelius. Chris, last words from you.
I think my words are pretty straightforward, and you've really heard it from the panel. We can do this, and we can do it faster and quicker than we've ever done it before. I do think we need to think short-term, long-term, but we can make an awful lot of decisions right now to manage things like reputational risk, pilot new ideas, get the right legal frameworks into place, get the right standards into place. And I think a really important point to remind everybody is the private sector is miles out in front of governments. So, you know, in terms of enabling and priorities, it's governments that really need to move forward faster. If we focus on that, but it's all possible. It's all possible. We can do it. And I have to say, Africa is in the hot seat. For me, you've got a wonderful advantage to really put all of this in place and start testing and piloting these ideas now in order to then project the African economy as a whole forward, you know, by decades.
If I may take the next, because I have to drop off, I have a hard stop now. I just wanted to say that central bank digital currency may or may not be the solution for an African economy. I don't want to say the African continent because every country is different. It's important to keep that in mind, that there's no one size fits all solution, be it central bank digital currency or any other digital currency. It's important to recognize that difference, and then focus on what is possible now with a strategic vision, of course, in the long term, but do the small incremental steps using the potential that you have as your economy has to get towards that goal. Central bank digital currencies are not a very complex project. I mean, we have seen pilots across the world and economies are not as developed as China, like the Bahamas sand dollar, for example. Those are the kind of projects that might serve as like to give an idea of what is possible for an economy that faces some of the similar challenges, like an exemplary sub-Saharan economy, like large rural unbanked populations, people that are off the grid, and so on. So I encourage you to really look at what is feasible with a strategic vision of achieving that in the long term. I thank you, everyone, for having me on the panel. I'm sorry I have to drop off, but duty calls. Bye-bye.
Go on and change the world. Don't worry. Dr. Roslyn, final word.
Sonia. Yes, go for it, girl.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So the fintech market, the digital economy in Africa will continue to grow. It is providing us with the high growth potential and opportunities for investments, while simultaneously addressing the need for financial inclusion. And with more people gaining access to financial services, we will see greater levels of prosperity. And we will also see that there is the vulnerable group that will grow and make advancements in the economy. What is required, therefore, will be the education of these groups to know that these opportunities are available, these technologies are available for their use, and that the AFCFTA level the issue is that the AFCFTA and its accompanying annexes therefore present a unique opportunity for Africa to codify and highlight all the exciting and stimulating ideas and progressive innovations that are being brought across the continent with the aim of building a competitive continent for investors and investment. Indeed, developing the digital infrastructure to promote economic growth in Africa is extremely critical at this point. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
So thank you so much, Dr. Roslyn, Chris, Sonia in her absentia, and Cornelius and Michelle herself. Thank you very much for sharing your insights in this conversation, and looking forward as well to touching base with the rest of the audience a little later on as I wrap up my final panel for the afternoon. Please keep the conversation going on in the chat section of the Zoom. So thank you once again. My name is Sia Sangwin.
Sonia.